Good evening, ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. This is Alex coming at you from the underworld, and welcome back to another episode of In this episode, I'm reviewing Deeper Than Hell by Joshua Millican. Now, before I get started, I would like to note that even though this is a transgressive fiction book, it is also splatterpunk. And in my opinion, it does teeter on the edge of being extreme literature. Also, it does focus a great deal on drug abuse and drug addiction, so if those are subjects that you don't care to hear about, just know that I will be mentioning them throughout this review. Aside from that, this is a book that really wears on its reader, which that's not a bad thing. However, I would suggest that before starting and finishing this book, that you have something else lined up to read that's considered more of a lighter read. So, now that you've been warned, let's join Sunny and Drew as they brave the underworld to reach their destination known as Xanadu. Deeper Than Hell by Joshua Millican is told in the first-person perspective by a heroin addict named Sunny, who explains he's about to meet God. But before this meeting can take place, he elaborates that he had been living in tunnels and storm drains under the city of Las Vegas. From here, he explains that since he had been residing underground, he had met another heroin addict by the name of Drew, who he had lived with in a shanty in one of the main runoffs. Well, one day, because of a drug deal gone bad, Sunny has no choice but to follow Drew deeper underground until they get to a labyrinth known as the Web. Then, as they're being pursued by the drug dealer known as Thaddeus, Drew explains to Sunny that they're going to start a pilgrimage and their destination is a place called Xanadu. Yet, in order to get to Xanadu, they have to travel for what would be around 18 days underground, and they have to pass through territories that could be devastating to a person's mind, body, and soul. For this segment, I have a surprise for everyone, because I was able to interview the author Joshua Millican. So sit back and enjoy.
Joshua Millican here. Really stoked to be in the company of the illustrious Bookworm of the Damned. Want to thank you from the get-go for your support of my novel, Deeper Than Hell, my debut horror novel, out now via Encyclopocalypse Publishers, which you can get your own copy of on Amazon. Should be the first search result you get when you look for Deeper Than Hell. I appreciate that you've taken the time to read my novel and process it and ask me some really insightful questions. I did look them over a bit, but I haven't written out my answers or anything. I like to be really organic and off the cuff. So let's just talk about what you want to talk about, shall we? Your first question was, what were my inspirations for Deeper Than Hell? My inspirations for Deeper Than Hell are really all over the place. From a literary perspective, my main influences were Clive Barker, which I think is very obvious, especially in chapter 3, and also William Burroughs, who was part of the Beat generation, a really kind of famous heroin addict. And that influenced Deeper Than Hell immensely, not just in the fascination with heroin and addiction and needles, but I've since come to believe through this process that William S. Burroughs is kind of the inventor of psychedelic horror. And I loved Naked Lunch, the book, which can hardly be called a book. It's really just a collection of feverish scenarios but I'm also very influenced by horror cinema, and Naked Lunch is a good example of the crossover. The film by David Cronenberg, while confusing and surreal, is actually much more cohesive than the book by William Burroughs. And I think I give some shout outs in Deeper Than Hell, specifically, not just with addiction, but the black meat, the centipede meat, kind of pops up at one point in Deeper Than Hell. Through my years at Dread Central, as editor-in-chief, before that managing editor, before that contributor, I just immersed myself in the world of horror movies, horror cinema in general was a really big influence on Deeper Than Hell. And that's why I filled my book with Easter eggs and homages and shout outs and inside jokes that horror fans will hopefully connect with. I think they have been. Because, for me, cinema is as much a love as literature. So I was really inspired by both, and I wrote Deeper Than Hell with a very cinematic eye, imagining that this was a movie with a limitless budget, where the sky was really the limit. And I just went for it in terms of, I've jokingly said if they made this into a film, it would have $100 million budget, much more likely to be adapted into a graphic novel or maybe even a video game VR type situation. I was also very influenced by conspiracy theories and YouTube videos. I love a good conspiracy theory, and I love just going down some rabbit holes on YouTube. That comes through very much in the character of Drew, who is, like me, also really gets lost in these conspiracy theories. And that's kind of the impetus for the journey. I just love me some conspiracy theories. So, I pulled from literature, cinema, fringe sciences, and even real facts. A friend of mine said one of the things she loved about Deeper Than Hell was that every few pages she would have to go and Google something to see if it was real or not. And a lot of times, there's some factual nuggets buried inside the onslaught of insanity that is Deeper Than Hell. So lots of influences. With psychedelic horror, I think that offers you the opportunity to go down many different avenues, as long as you can creatively connect them. So, there you have it. Question number 2. You comment that many sequences are vivid with detail. At the same time, it is vague in regards to what Sonny is really experiencing. And I did have to perform sort of a balancing act, leaving the reader to question whether this is all a dream or if it's all really happening. Is this a mental, physical, or spiritual crisis, or all of the above? What I can say to that is this is definitely one of those stories where it's more about the journey than the destination. And I don't say that as a cop-out at all. I'm talking about, Alice in Wonderland, for example. You don't sit there and question, was it real or not, just because it was such a great trip. And hopefully that's the experience you will have when you read Deeper Than Hell. I think if you want to believe that this is something that's meant to be real, that this is something that Sonny and Drew actually experienced, you can make a case for that. I will say that I think the simplest answer, if you were really going to just look at Occam's razor and say, what the hell's going on in Deeper Than Hell? It's easiest to assume it's a fever dream. That this is a delirium, that it is, some sort of personal apocalypse for sure, but that it's all mental. At the same time, that's kind of why I threw that epilogue in there. It's kind of like, if you insist on an answer, I'll give you one. And it might not be the one you want. It probably certainly is not the one you expect. And ultimately, it leaves you asking even more questions. It's like, I can give you an answer if you want one. But that really will pose more questions and hopefully send you down another rabbit hole. I'm a big fan of difficult and challenging movies, especially in the horror arena, that don't hand you everything on a silver platter and allow you to kind of decide for yourself. So you can decide for yourself, or you can dissect the prologue, the implications of that, and then maybe go back and reread a few passages from the guts of Deeper Than Hell to see if it all fits together. The reader's always guessing, and I acknowledge that. That's why early on in the book, I even mentioned Jacob's Ladder, because I know that people are going to be reading it going, is this all a dream? And frankly, that's what the characters in the book wonder too. So you're all in the same boat. And I hope it's just a really enjoyable experience. And that ultimately it was the trip that kept you hooked rather than the destination, which I still think is pretty fucking crazy, if I do say so myself. So part 3, question number 3, you mentioned that world building is a huge part of the book, especially with Sonny exploring multiple levels of the underworld on his pilgrimage. What steps did I take upon building these worlds and civilizations? I did map out kind of, that's kind of a pun for those of you who have read Deeper Than Hell. I did kind of map out the trip before I started. So, I had this idea of, okay, they're going to travel through this number of layers, and each layer I felt had to be very distinct, but also reflect different perceptions of hell, because Deeper Than Hell is both a literal and metaphorical downward spiral, and the whole idea of life underground is very tied to the concept of an underworld, of hell, of Hades. And I wanted that to be reflected in each of the destinations. I think I've made it clear in the synopsis and in other interviews I've done. You can think of Dante's Inferno as a parallel allegory. You can even find 9 levels in Deeper Than Hell if you look. I mean, there are probably 6 main destinations, but you could, if you really wanted to, you could find 9 levels. And as someone who's read Dante's Inferno, it was just, even though it's all hell, each ring is very distinct. Some are fiery, some are icy, some are frustrating, some are savage. And that's what I wanted to do with Deeper Than Hell. I kind of wanted different chapters and different levels to almost reflect different subgenres of horror. There's the body horror / medical horror chapter version of hell. There is kind of this cerebral psychological hell, sort of an inescapableness of the inescapableness of destiny. The kind of hell that makes you feel like you have no control over your life. And then there's, some real Hieronymus Bosch fantasies. The Great Bottom is kind of a cavern, city-sized cavern filled with society's rejects, and they've kind of devolved as someone tossed into a hellish environment very well might. And ultimately, coming up with a destination, a Xanadu, so to speak. I just really tried to create something as unique as possible. Nothing's really unique. I was just pulling from so many different visions and ideas, but hopefully the combination and the blend is unique. That was one of the fun parts of Deeper Than Hell, is that you don't stay any one place too long, so you're always surprised about what's coming around the corner next. All right, question number 4. I knew you were going to get to this because a lot of people do. Yes, there are quite a few grotesque sequences that Sunny experiences. At some point, do you feel like you became too extreme? Also, are there limits you have when writing? What are my own personal limits? Obviously, you're talking about chapter 3. I love that, even people who haven't read Deeper Than Hell have kind of heard of the infamy of chapter 3. And you're no doubt referring to a specific character who I refer to as the girl with the nose, to not be too spoilery while still being intriguing. And I think when I wrote it, I had a sense that it was very provocative, very controversial even. But I didn't know it would freak people out as much as it did. I've even had a friend who read the book who told me that ruined the entire book for her. That it was well written and everything, but she read that paragraph and she could just never love the book again. I didn't intend to do that. I wrote without a lot of self-censorship. And just as I thought these things, I went for it, and it was, chapter 3 is my homage to David Cronenberg and Clive Barker, body horror, medical horror. And I was trying to play with the big boys, I was trying to imagine extreme, irreversible forms of body modification, and that's where my mind took me. I think truthfully, when I was writing it, I found other parts of chapter 3 more personally upsetting, the very gritty medical horror aspects of it, feeding tubes and catheters and things like that. Personally, is kind of like my version of hell, that I've never experienced either of those things, and they just sound so evasive and uncomfortable and nightmarish. But yeah, this is quite a moment. This cult of sex pain worshipping acolytes who are basically Cenobite wannabes, I really just kind of let my mind go. And I apologize to anyone who was legitimately upset by the introduction of this character. But at the same time, if you can make it through chapter 3, it's pretty smooth sailing the rest of the way. I think you'll agree. Yeah, there are more gross moments for sure. There are more gross moments. Sonny has to eat a monkey at one point, and that's all I'll say about that. But yeah, chapter 3 was a doozy. Now, do I personally have limits? Absolutely. I have to want to get into that kind of headspace, and I think it's obviously in my mind, my image of Sybil, the girl with the nose, is monstrous and nightmarish, but not as realistic as maybe some other people are imagining it, and that's why it's so upsetting for them. But I personally, my limits, I have no interest in writing about any sort of harm to children. That just seems like a miserable experience. I know that some people, want to challenge themselves to either read or write, the most upsetting imagery or scenarios. I just became a father less than a year ago. And even before that, I'm just really empathetic. So, I think the same would go with animals. I would take no joy in either reading or writing about harm done to animals. As far as, sexual assault, I think that's another thing where I would always tread lightly, just because it would be so unpleasant to experience, for me as an artist or somebody receiving the art. At the same time, I've seen that horrific scenario woven into some really amazing horror stories. So, that would depend. But, when I got into this nightmarish psychedelic world, I kind of just threw everything against the wall. And I'm surprised that, good and bad. Controversy is good. I'm surprised that some people were so upset by that, but it's kind of crazy that I was able to write something that kind of stood out and shocked people, even people who are immersed in the world of horror as you are. And that I was able to write something so extreme that it really rises to the top. So there you have it. How can readers contact me? Twitter is the best way at this point. It's Josh_Millican, Millican. So find me there. Find out more about Deeper Than Hell. Got a signing event coming up first week in August. And hopefully I'll be doing more of those. And I've got a few other books in the works. So thank you, Mr. Damned Bookworm of the Damned, for having me on and allowing me to spew a bit about my nightmarish, disgusting, grotesque, transgressive, and transcendent novel, Deeper Than Hell. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Joshua, for sharing that with us. I really appreciate the time that you took out of your busy schedule to do this. And yeah, you totally made my day. But now that we have that covered, it's time to move on to the spoiler section, which, if you haven't read this before, I'm about to reveal some things that could ruin the experience for you. So if you would like to click away, all you have to do is scroll down to the comments, and you'll see that I have a pinned comment at the top with a timestamp in it. Once you click that timestamp, it will direct you away from the spoilers and bring you to the thoughts section. Now, you only have 17 seconds to do this, so ready, set, go! Since everyone's had the opportunity to click away, I would like to talk about a few of my favorite WTF moments. First is the moment after Sonny wakes up and sees he's under the care of what could possibly be a German doctor. Now, leading up to this, Sonny had abandoned Drew because they were attacked by a group of what could possibly be these crazed, monstrous elderly men. And as he's trying to escape, he's climbing down a ladder that's inside of an elevator freight. But as he's descending, he discovers that the rungs of this ladder have been lined with razor blades. So after he mangles his hands, he falls to the lower level and gets knocked unconscious. Well, after he wakes up, he discovers that he's been strapped down to a table, and even though his injured hands have been stitched, he's approached by a doctor who looks like a Cenobite with these mechanical syringe fingers, which, of course, each finger is either filled with drugs or poison. But at this point, Sonny learns that his sadistic caregiver presides over 12 alkalites who have had their consciousness expanded due to the surgeries that have been performed on them. And among those alkalites is a psychic by the name of Sybil, whose eyes and mouth had been sewn shut. Also, since she eats and has sex through her nose, her septum had been removed. And between the doctor and Sybil, they try to persuade Sonny into staying with them by using sex and drugs. As I've said a million times before, body horror freaks me the hell out, but I can't look away from it. Also, I found it really interesting when Drew revealed to Sonny that this supposed Cenobite-looking doctor was nothing more than a human being, and he wasn't even a German doctor. Then, after we learn that information, we discover that this supposed doctor is from old steel industry money, and because of that money, he was able to establish the acolytes, which in turn allowed him to play around with body modifications and experimental drugs. Once this was revealed, I was really on the fence in regards to what was actually happening. Like, on one hand, there were enough supernatural elements going on where I thought, okay, well, this is really a spiritual experience. But on the other hand, because of the experimental drugs, I was like, okay, well, perhaps this is all nothing but one big elaborate drug trip. Which, to be honest, I kept flip-flopping between the two possibilities all the way until the end of the book. My next favorite WTF moment was when Sunny was rescued from the Great Bottom. Now, prior to this, Sunny had escaped the Acolytes and he ends up in a place called the Tabernacle City, which this is operated by a cult leader named Archibald, where he and his cult worship the Basilic. Well, it turns out that this specific cult is hypersexual and they practice contact therapy. Also, they undergo a brainwashing process through what's known as a transference ceremony, which, by the way, the ceremony almost drives Sunny insane. But after he escapes while everyone's having their weekly orgy, he ends up running into Thad, who has had his legs eaten off by the same people who had attacked Drew. So at this point, they end up going to the Great Bottom, which this is described as a post-apocalyptic underworld that is full of fires, and everyone there worships this monstrous thing known as the Registrar, which, unfortunately, to get to their destination, they have to cross through this territory. So as they're discreetly trying to make their way from point A to B, Thad gets carried off by the crowd. Then Sunny gets brought to the high priest, who throws him through a trap door where he's attacked by a monitor lizard. And before the lizard can kill him, he's saved by the deep underground military base. Y'all, due to all of the chaos that was going on, I was like, how in the hell is Sunny gonna get out of this? Which, because of everything just being thrown at the reader, I totally forgot that 10 pages earlier, Drew had pounded into Sunny's head to not forget about the deep underground military bases. So when this came about, I was like, makes sense. I totally forgot about him. And normally, when something is pounded into the reader's head like how this was, I usually remember it. But because of Millican's writing and his imagination, I got so caught up in everything that I totally forgot this was a possibility. So, bravo to the author. My final WTF moment was the lengthy process that Sunny had to go through in order to meet God. Now, prior to this, he had met with a gatekeeper by the name of Eve, who had mentally transmitted the keys to him for Xanadu, and upon him using these keys, he gets shot through a canyon where he encounters a group of troglodytes known as the Grim Finger Clanspeople, who actually want to eat him. But upon him suffering at their hands, their leader discovers that Sunny is different, and because of this, he wants to put Sunny through a rite of acceptance. Well, throughout this brutal process, Sunny is dipped in boiling oil and wax, his wounds are eaten by larvae, he's placed in bubbling sulfur water, and the list continues. Also, after all of that, he has to battle and kill a giant monkey and a praying mantis, which, after he succeeds, he's met by this elephant-looking man who shoots him up with drugs. Then, he's finally able to see the face of God. So, the whole rite of acceptance that Sunny had to go through was absolutely insane. And if I had to go through these steps, I would have told the clanspeople to simply eat me. However, I really appreciated the aftermath of Sunny seeing God, because leading up to this moment, every single second of this book was nothing but pure chaos. But after he went through his transformation, we get this idea that Sunny is now at peace. And he has this realization that he's a part of everyone and everything, and he just seems like he's all zenned out. So, yeah, good for him. And the thing is, this really made me question, was he truly having a spiritual experience, or was all of this honestly nothing more than just a drug-fueled fever dream? I would like to take this opportunity to bitch about Jeremy. Now, for those of you who don't know who this short dick man is, he's the asshole who married Sonny's sister, Gina. Now, what had happened was this asshole ended up cheating on his bride-to-be at his bachelor's party in Vegas, which, because of Sonny seeing him do this and being bullied by Jeremy's two dipshit brothers, Sonny ran off into the night and went on a drunk binge that landed him in this insane downward spiral that we had just read about. Then, in Gina's journal, she mentioned how this bastard Jeremy had the audacity to not only leave Sonny in Vegas, but to expect her to continue life as normal. Honey, let me tell you, had I been Gina, I would have blessed Jeremy out at that altar before God and everyone. Then I would have taken that pathetic little wedding ring he got me and I would have freckle punched it up his little ass. And to be honest, she suffered a lot of emotional bullshit because of this male chauvinist pig. But at least she eventually broke away from him. Which, this is when we understand that a conjunction is actually happening. And this means, because of the conjunction being real in her world, then everything that happened to Sonny actually really did happen and it wasn't just a drug trip. Deeper Than Hell by Joshua Millican was a swan dive into madness. And because of the amount of chaos that this book provided, there were plenty of times that I had to pause my reading just to be able to digest its insanity, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Aside from that, the character development was very well fleshed out, and as far as themes are concerned, not only did this book present us with a spiritual journey, but it focused on the horrors of drug addiction and betrayal. Character-wise, Sonny immediately got my attention, and even though I feel like he wasn't a saint by any means, he also wasn't evil. Like, even though he made a lot of poor decisions, I think that these were based out of his depression and drug abuse. Then, as far as Drew is concerned, he really reminded me of that type of friend who is really eccentric and never shuts up, but you also keep them close because they seem loyal and like a good shoulder to lean on. Also, eventually, even Thad was humanized to a degree, which I was really surprised to see that side of him. Aside from those characters, the different cults and tribes were very intimidating and interesting due to their appearances and their philosophies. Also, I really appreciated how the author was able to blur other worlds into this book, because as Sonny is pursuing his pilgrimage, he encounters Alice from Alice in Wonderland and the hobbits from Lord of the Rings. Which, because of the nods that were made to these classic characters, it told me that Sonny was on a similar journey. But from a spiritual aspect, I really appreciated how the author took us a level deeper and emphasized that Sonny and Drew were going on a pilgrimage and the underworld was a labyrinth. Which, from my understanding, a pilgrimage was taken whenever there was a religious motive, and labyrinths tend to have religious ties as well as being used as tools for self-consciousness. So to see how the author used these elements in regards to spirituality, it really added a whole other level to this book for me. And I just really love how he took the time to add those extra moments and extra details. Next up is the subject of drug abuse, which this is seen in multiple ways throughout this book. One of which is how Sonny uses drugs to cope with his life. Then, in my opinion, once he went underground, everything became worse because he was surrounded by enablers. Now, there were a few moments in this book where Sonny used drugs to be able to connect with Drew spiritually, and even though this did help him get from point A to point B, I still have to consider the repercussions of what these drugs did to his mind and body. But aside from that, we do have quite a few scenes where the different cults in this book use drugs against Sonny so he can feel at home with them, which, of course, this leads into subjects such as cult abuse and brainwashing. Also, this book does focus on the repercussions of betrayal and gaslighting, which I wish I could elaborate a little bit more on those subjects, but if I did, I would reveal some spoilers. And to be honest, this book does focus on quite a few other subjects, but if I were to touch on those, I would of course be revealing spoilers, and this video would also probably be an hour long. Overall, Deeper Than Hell didn't scare me or creep me out. However, there were quite a few times that my toes curled because of its gross out moments. Deeper Than Hell by Joshua Millican is a book that stands in its own circle of hell, where it blends sci-fi, fantasy, horror, and transgressive fiction into a solid nightmare. And while this book isn't for the faint of heart, this is something that I did thoroughly enjoy. So, if you're looking for a mind-melting horror book where anything and everything can happen to the protagonist, then I do recommend Deeper Than Hell. Now that it's time to wrap up this video, I would like to thank these amazing people for contributing to my Patreon account. As you can tell, some of the names listed here are creators, so be sure to check out their work. And if you would like to contribute to my Patreon account, I have a link available in the description section of this episode, where for $5 a month I'll give you a shout out like what you see here at the end of my videos. And if there is a certain profession you would like for me to tie to your name, just let me know and I'll include that as well. Also, I do have a second tier available where for $10 a month I'll still give you the shout out that you see here, but I do creepy photography on the side, so at the beginning of every month I'll send you over one of my creepy photos. From there you can print it off and do whatever you like. So if you're able to contribute, that's awesome. If not, no sweat. I just hope you return to this channel so we can have a good time together. Also, if you would like to hit me up on social media, links to my Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok are all available in the description of this episode, as well as a link to my Amazon wish list in case you want to spoil me. And if you have not subscribed to this channel, be sure to subscribe and click that notifications bell because I have more book reviews coming in the near future. So until we see each other again, I hope you have a great week and sweet nightmares.